In most media, your true long-term good guy versus bad guy story only ever works if the pair are evenly matched or can't do lasting damage to each other. The villain needs to come back next week with a new plan so they can never be outright defeated, and the heroes may fall but they'll always get back up. But what if that's not the case? What if the hero's failure is all a part of the grand scheme and the bigger picture? We're talking about video game endings in this video, so spoiler warnings are in full effect because I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 more video games where the true ending is the bad ending. Number 8. Blood Omen, Legacy of KAIN. Whilst the Soul Reaver games are arguably the jewel in the Legacy of KAIN crown, they only happen depending on certain events in the first title. Blood Omen introduces the dark fantasy world of Nosgoth and stars KAIN, a recently awakened vampire who intends to enact revenge for his murder and winds up part of a bigger plot over the balance of the land. At the end of the game, players are given a simple choice: either choose the side of heroics and sacrifice themselves to save the world, or raise it and rule over the ashes. If the player chooses to be a goody two-shoes, then vampires are vanquished from the realm. However, if they choose the canonical ending, then they turn Nosgoth into a wasteland and become a megalomaniac. Even aside from the tradition of saving the world in video games, you'd naturally assume that sending KAIN off into the afterlife after fulfilling his unfinished business might be the right thing to do, but that's not the case. In choosing selfishness, KAIN becomes the antagonist for the next game in the series, Soul Reaver, and the ravaged Nosgoth becomes the setting for the whole franchise. The future of Legacy of KAIN literally only exists if you not only let evil win, but become it. Number 7. Dragon Quest. Over the years, the interconnected nature of the Dragon Quest series has become rather tenuous, but the first trilogy of titles are all clearly linked. Dragon Quest II takes place 100 years after the original, which saw the player going on a quest and slaying a dragon, hence the name, really. There's a moment before the closing fight where the Dragon Lord will actually do the stereotypical villain thing and invite the player to join them, promising to let them rule over half of the world. It's intended to make players steel their nerves before they launch into battle, and DQ2 pretty much assumes you selected that choice. After all, if you don't, then the screen fades to black and the game freezes. However, 30 years later, a little more was added to this previously thought plotline cul-de-sac in Dragon Quest Builders. In this charming little spin-off, you play the role of not a warrior, but of a builder. These titles really are that straightforward, who is charged with reconstructing the world after the defeat of the hero. In this timeline of events, the player accepted the Dragon Lord's offer, which turned out to be a trap, and the dragon destroyed the kingdom. The hero from Dragon Quest can even be found hiding out in a small fortress he's nicknamed Half of the World, and cackling like a maniac to really drive home his failure. Number 6. Silent Hill 2. All-time horror classic Silent Hill 2 puts the player in the role of James Sunderland, who by the game's end remembers that he killed his own wife out of desperation. The game finishes with one of many endings, none of which have ever been given the outright stamp of canon approval. However, there are certain implications that can be examined. Firstly, James's father Frank appears in Silent Hill 4. At one point, the player can inspect a photo which remarks that Frank's son and daughter-in-law disappeared after going to the town of Silent Hill. Now, it's reasonable that James merely broke contact with his family after he cracked and killed Mary. After all, Silent Hill 2 doesn't give a timescale between the murder and the events on screen. However, according to the novelization, it happened just a few days ago, meaning that he hadn't been gone long at all. In that case, James doesn't leave the town after Silent Hill 2, which counts the relatively more upbeat endings out. Ergo, Silent Hill 2 either ends with him attempting to perform a ritual to revive his dead wife, or driving into the lake to pay his penance. The latter of these, called In Water, happens to be the ending in the novel, and one preferred by several of the game's staff. But if that's too depressing for you, then you can just imagine the game ended with a Shiba Inu in a headset, if you like. Number 5. Max Payne. Mr. Payne has led a pretty awful life through his trilogy of games, but at the end of Max Payne 3, he at least gets to quite literally walk off into the sunset. However, his final fate may well be much darker and, bizarrely, tucked away in another game. Control, Quantum Break, and Alan Wake, each one of Remedy Entertainment's games, features not just Easter eggs, but pure justification that all of their titles take place in the same universe. Alan Wake, star of his own 2010 horror title, is a novelist known for his crime thriller series. The hero of these stories shares some surprising similarities with Max Payne. That being said, the man in these books is called Alex Casey, even though he is quite literally voiced by Max Payne actor James McCaffrey. Casey has a gruff noir detective way of looking at things and an addiction to painkillers. His penultimate book is called The Fall of Alex Casey, a reference to the title of The Fall of Max Payne. And in the final volume, The Sudden Stop, Casey describes his death as the result of chasing revenge 13 years ago, the number of years between Max Payne 1 and Max Payne 3. Clearly, Max Payne exists in Alan's world. Perhaps Alan chose to protect his identity by changing his name when adapting his life into books. Moreover, somewhere along the trilogy, or perhaps afterwards, Max most certainly falls for good. Number 4. Crash Bandicoot 2 Wrath of Cortex. If the player simply gets through the story of Crash Bandicoot 2, then Dr. Neo Cortex is last seen flying out into space and Crash and Coco retire to the beach. Coco remarks that Cortex's satellite is still out there somewhere and the evil Doctor can be heard laughing. Want to take it down? Great! Just collect every gem in the game and then realise that you've accidentally awakened a great evil because of it. By 100% completing Crash 2, players fire up Embryo's laser cannon to blast the Cortex Vortex out of the sky, with one piece falling back to Earth. This might not mean much at first, but upon booting up Crash 3, this is exactly what sets the entire events of that game into action. A piece of the satellite collides with a temple which awakens Uka Uka, a great evil that even the otherwise stoic Aku Aku fears. This one is only the bad ending if you don't want to play any more Crash games, I suppose. Then again, Crash would more likely prefer to hang out and nap all day rather than go on another adventure to get burnt, frozen, squashed, impaled and otherwise blown up. This is all your fault. Why couldn't you have just settled with good enough? Number 3. WARCRAFT, Orcs and Humans. The sheer size of the WARCRAFT franchise and universe is quite bountiful now, but originally it all started out as a single, humble yet impressive RTS title. WARCRAFT Orcs and Humans is recognised as a game that really pushed for multiplayer within the genre, and even offered 2 campaigns to play through, playing as both sides of the war. The game certainly set up some of the basic framework for Azeroth, but this was far before Orcs were given the sympathetic backstory that they would be known for. They weren't equals in the game. Humans were clearly the good guys and Orcs were clearly the evil monsters. This is evidenced by the fact that at the end of the Orc campaign, the human kingdom is in ruins. However, that's what makes it important. This is actually a big pivotal moment in Azeroth's history, where the human forces are forced to flee their land and make allegiances with the likes of the elves and the dwarves. Despite expectation, it's this ending that Warcraft 2 builds upon, and the next 25 plus years of games. If you beat the human campaign, the Horde is pushed back and presumably never heard from again, and without that, we wouldn't have been grinding to level 60 in World of Warcraft. So, make of that what you will. Number 2. Shadow Hearts. One of the most underrated RPG series of all time, Shadow Hearts is an overlooked PS2 saga of dark fantasy and cosmic horror. The original Shadow Hearts has 2 possible endings. The good ending sees protagonist Yuri and love interest Alice overcoming the big bad and presumably living out the rest of their days together. In the dramatically darker bad ending, Alice sacrifices her soul and is killed. That's gotta suck for poor old Yuri, but at least gives him something to work towards, which is why it's this ending that's carried forwards into Shadow Hearts Covenant. In the sequel, Yuri is driven by his desire to revive his deceased lover. Whilst Covenant also has multiple endings, either way, players go back in time in an attempt to undo their original mistake. Ergo, it has to have happened in the first place at all for them to change the mistakes they made in the second. It's pretty clever and really rewards players who have invested time into both the first and second game, not to mention the predecessor Kudelka, which importantly also features a bad ending which is canon to Shadow Hearts. So, lesson learned, if you want to know the true story of Shadow Hearts, always go with the most depressing option. And number 1, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. This Nintendo 64 adventure game classic might be the only game where no matter what happens, it's considered canonical. For a long time, Zelda fans tried their best to make head and tail out of the spiralling number of games in the series. Dedicated lore experts slaved away trying to understand which games took place when and how to justify how Hyrule looked one particular way and then another way entirely in the next title. And then Nintendo blew everyone's minds with its three-way split timeline. In Ocarina of Time, as is his wont, Link faces down the villainous Ganon. With the beast slain, the time-travelling hero is sent back to the time he came from to live out the rest of his childhood. From here, the timeline splits. The young Link goes on to Majora's Mask, and the world he leaves behind eventually floods to become the setting of The Wind Waker. But what if you die during the boss fight? Well, that's canon too. If Link is defeated by Ganon in this showdown, then the timeline splits in a third direction. The adventures that feature on this arm focus on the decline of Hyrule in the earliest games in the series, like Link to the Past and the original Legend of Zelda. So worry not if you die during Ocarina of Time, you're just making sure the timeline stays intact. Right? And that's the list. Let us know what you thought this video down in the comments below. Which of these bad canonical endings is your favourite? And of course, let us know of any others that we missed. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit that notification bell. And don't forget to go to WhatCulture.com where you can get more content like this every day. I've been Cy for WhatCulture, and have a good week.